out of this practice session onto live,
Okay.
and then we can start.
We're ready to go live, Karen.
Yes, sir. Okay, we'll go ahead and take the roll. Representative Kenner.
Here in Sheridan.
Practice session onto live, and then we can start.
We're ready to go live, Karen.
I'm sorry, sir. Yes, sir. All right, there we go. My apologies. Representative Larson.
Here.
Representative Schwartz.
Here.
Representative Simpson.
Here.
Representative Stith.
Here.
Representative Walters.
Here.
Chairman Nicholas.
Present.
You have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. And so, Ryan, are you going to tell us what our agenda is today?
Mr. Chairman, I'll go ahead and give you the agenda for the bills
right,
that we're
Karen,
looking
go
at
ahead.
this morning. We're on your agenda to begin is House Bill 47, Department of Family Services Indigent Burial Program. Then 48, which is Community Juvenile Services Block Grant Program. Third bill to look at this morning is House Bill 49, Agency Fee Revisions.
Okay, committee. Let's start off with the Department of Family Services Indigent Burial Program, House Bill 47. So as I understand it, the purpose is we're going to finalize these bills and kick them back to JAC, to the joint JAC, or does it just run as a House bill?
Mr. Chairman, it'll come through. It'll be a House bill. We'll take it to committee of the whole, and then it'll shift over.
Yeah, and so it's already scheduled, and I think on the docket for the session, right? I think it is. So with that, this bill has already been worked. Do we have any questions about the bill itself? Before we...
Mr. Chairman, I think we have Director Schmidt here. If we want her to kind of review and remind us what the intent of the bill is, and then we
That'd
could.
be great. Director Schmidt?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Corin Schmidt. I'm the Director of the Department of Family Services. And this is a bill that we requested as a result of one of our step 2 budget reductions, where we eliminated the indigent burial program for DFS. Essentially what this program is it's general fund monies to families whose loved one who passed was enrolled in Medicaid or TANF, Social Security insurance, and I think a few others. So in one of the benefit eligibility programs. There is another bill in corporations that looks to fund the indigent program through a surcharge on death certificate fees. There's a little bit of confusion we have with that bill that will straighten out with corporations, but there is an alternative to funding that is being looked at by corporations right now. Anyway, what we're asking is just to, the bill requires, or the statute requires us to pay for the program. What we're asking is that there be an insert of subject to availability of funds. So it retains the program, but it doesn't require that we continue with it, even though we don't have an appropriation.
So Director Schmidt, my question is, in the House, the bill in the corporations, have they done a fiscal analysis to see if it will be a comparable dollar, so that the amounts, the $1,000 per, up to $1,000, those funds will likely be available based upon statistically for the number of deaths that we've funded in the past or in looking to the future?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if they did a statistical analysis. My understanding of the bill is that they're just going to collect a surcharge, and that at a given point in time, we can request reimbursement for any of our expenditures out of the fund that the surcharge is deposited into. And that's the complicating factor for us. It assumes that we have money to spend in order to get reimbursed. Right now, we have about $97,000 left of the one-time appropriation that was provided to us in state fiscal year, or in the legislative session 2020. So the question we're going to have for corporations is, at what point do we kind of take a snapshot of what we can be reimbursed for, since it's no longer going to be part of our standard budget?
Representative Co-Chair Larson, or Vice Chair Larson.
Thank you. So Director Schmidt, the way I understand that, because I think it does get a little confusing, I just want to make sure that I have this correct. So currently right now we have two scenarios. One was the program through your budget. Second being is we've done a section 300, I think it was 333 or something like that, where we made an appropriation that says we would add a surcharge to death certificates until that amount accumulated up to 123,000, at which time it would stop, and then we would reimburse indigent burials under the same requirements up to $500. And now that $500 was a little bit different than you. And that footnote is different than where you're at statutorily. So if we remove this language from you, we're leaving that footnote in, and they can continue to expand those funds that we put in with the footnote through the biennium. So is that part of my understanding correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that footnote, if I recall, was actually vetoed by the governor, but the appropriation stayed in. So the footnote the footnote does not apply, but we do have this appropriation. So we've been spending that appropriation just as we had under our regular rules, but it is only one time. So what the step 2 budget reduction did was completely remove it from our standard budget.
And then follow up, Mr. Chairman, on that is then when we go to the consideration of the bill in the Corporations Committee, they're going to generate revenue by adding a surcharge to the death certificate, and it would not be under the same constraints that you have now, meaning that the individual would have been participating in TANF or Power or Medicaid. It just provides funding for indigent burial up to a whatever that level is going to be. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, my understanding of the legislation that's proposed in corporations is that we would still have to comply with our statute. So it refers to statute 42-2-103, which is what lays out the requirements for our burial program.
Interesting. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Kinner.
that was a demotion, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I feel very confident that Chairman Zwanitzer will align that bill with the DFS concerns. Just wanted to point that out.
And so, I mean, I've been getting several emails from various morticians worried about being unfunded. Has anyone else been receiving those and responding to them? And so what I'd like to do is have and I've been emailing back and forth, is make sure we've got a succinct, maybe 1-paragraph answer, that when we receive those, we can all respond back in a consistent fashion. So Representative Larson, could you put that together for us?
I'd be happy to, Mr. Chairman. And the discussion I had with folks around here is I think that it's really unclear to them whose responsibility indigent burial is. And they've looked to this program realizing that there are some constraints to it. But the reality of that is this the role of state government, or is it the role of county government to take care of indigent burial? And that may have to, that may be an interim discussion that we have to look at to clarify whose role that really is. And that'll, I think, again, would depend on what we see happen with, I think it's House Bill 42 that's in corporations.
Representative
Yes,
Schwartz.
I'll put that together.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm confused as well, but when I read it's House Bill 29, and it addresses when county commissioners are responsible for indigent burials, and it clearly states that they are only responsible for persons who are not receiving Power or TANF or SSI. So that's the distinction, I believe, between the two bills. Where I get confused is in that bill, they create this indigent burial account, which is based on the new fees, which is estimated at $180,000 a fiscal year. And there's no reference in the bill we're looking at, House Bill 47, to access that account, which seems to me there should be a reference there that the monies that are being collected for the fees apply to both kinds of indigent burials. But maybe I'm confused.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So I think this bill just says that what we're doing in this bill is we're just aligning it with what we see other places where the DFS has responsibility as long as funding is available. And we put that language in there that says if the funds aren't available, then the program, the agency is not responsible to make such a payment.
So yeah, what I would like to do is have LSO kind of re-examine this and make sure that these tie in appropriately to the to House Bill 29, to House Bill 47 if passed, and make sure that and to basically address that your discussion, Representative Larson, so that at least until we determine who's going to be responsible, that the services are covered in the meantime.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, I think it's interesting that the morticians point out as in the new bill that this new fund would be under the same criteria as it currently exists, and then that the county commissioners would be responsible for the rest. It would be my thoughts that what this bill would cover would be the minority of indigent burial deaths in the state, and that the larger majority of them are now going to be passed on to, are going to be identified as being taken care of by the county. But
and then presumably that fund that we're creating from the death certificate would reimburse counties. No. So if I look at page 2 of this basically kind of puts a cap on what they can charge, and that county commissioners can't be responsible for anything more than that was set out in 424113. And I don't know what that says because I don't have it in front of me, but
well, I think the real determining factor, and Director Schmidt can maybe correct us on this, is that the person at the time of death has to be involved in one of those programs.
right.
And so under the new bill, this account that's being created would fund indigent burial deaths under that same criteria. And anybody else would be the responsibility of the county. And
so Corin or Lloyd, if you know, who's been paying for those funerals that don't fit within this criteria in the past? Have been counties?
Mr. Chairman, that's my understanding.
And do we know how much that is, and do we have any data on it?
Go ahead.
Representative Swartz?
Thank you, Mr. My recollection when I was a commissioner, our budget was $5,000 a year for indigent burials, and we didn't always use it, but that was the number we worked from.
So that would be roughly 3 or 4 burials, right?
Yeah, probably 5. I mean, call it 5 because I think we were figuring 1,000 per burial. But that was a long time ago, and I'm old.
Representative Larson.
I had a conversation with Davis Funeral Home yesterday, and they said historically in Fremont County that's fluctuated. Some years or there was a period of time where funeral homes just absorbed that cost, just took care of it as a kind of a civic duty. Other years where the county paid for it. Currently, if the county pays for it, it depends on where they're buried. If they're buried in Riverton, it's $175. And if they're buried in Lander at Mount Hope Cemetery, it's $900. And in talking to, I think in talking to him further, that just varies widely around the state. And I think that really supports maybe a little more investigation into that whole process.
Well, and the next question is, whose responsibility is to do the investigation? Is it a JAC issue? Should it be a corporations issue? Should it be a department, I don't know. Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Question for Director Schmidt. Current law provides up to $1,000 reimbursement. Has it been the practice in the last year to reimburse at the rate of $500 instead?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith, yes. In the 2016, this budget was reduced, and as part of that reduction, the awards were capped at $500. So it's up to $500. So there's eligible expenses under our rule and policy that says this is what we will reimburse for. So any eligible expenses under that is up to $500. And it's on behalf, it's for the family, right? It's on behalf of the family that this award is made.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So on the one hand, it seems like if House Bill 29 passes and House Bill 47 passes, then structurally everything's fine because we've created a new fund. And then the other issue really is whether $500, if that's enough to cover the marginal cost to the funeral homes. Because it seems, I think Senator Bebout's point in December was fair that it's not right to expect the funeral homes to simply bear the expense of it. So at least and I don't know the economics of it, but the funeral director that I spoke with yesterday, thought that their marginal cost of burial was more than $500. So is that?
Yeah, I think we've got emails from I was emailing back and forth with the director of their association, and they were going to provide some specifics. But it's interesting that what Lloyd just said is that some folks can do it for $175, and some people can do it for $900. And what I asked was for specifics on if it's their cost, if it's their retail or wholesale, or exactly what we're talking about, to know those figures. But Director, my question is, I'm looking at the statute. We authorized you to go down to 500 in 2016, but that authorization, was that in a bill or was that just in a budget?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know. That was before I was here, and I don't know if that was done through a footnote. I just know that we followed the policy of up to 500.
Well, so I'm going back to the House bill and reading the language. It says you can pay up to 1,000, but that was in your discretion. So you set it at 500, even though you can go up to 1,000. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, yes, that's correct.
And so if this fund is sufficient enough to cover, and you can determine that you will have sufficient funds, then you could start paying 750 or 800 or 1,000 based upon the amounts of this fund as it accrues and fills up.
Mr. Chairman, yes, we could be flexible. I think it's a policy decision really about, do you distribute the dollars more widely, or do you pay for more of the individual costs? And for our program, which is a little bit different than what I understand is the indigent program, is that it's families who are applying for these dollars. And so it's to help offset the costs of burials that the families may otherwise incur. Whereas a pure indigent burial where there is no one to support the costs of a burial, then that's what goes through the counties, and that's where then I don't know how they decide what the rate would be. But for us, it's for families.
Further questions? Is there any public comment? Actually, we probably need a motion on the bill first. We could do either one. Representative Larson?
Motion to move the bill.
Second.
Seconded by Representative McKinnon. Any further discussion on the bill? Seeing none, do we have any public comment? Karen, Ryan?
Mr. Chairman, I believe we have Kyle Erk. And I will go ahead and let him in. I believe he does have interest in providing public comment.
There's Kyle.
Make sure I'm unmuted. Can everybody hear me okay?
We can, Kyle. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning,
Tell
Mr.
us what we're
Chairman.
doing.
It's good to see you all again. Excuse me. For the record, yes, I'm Kyle Urbakite. I'm here today representing the Wyoming Funeral Directors Association. And the members are the most impacted by this situation, obviously. We are here today to oppose this legislation. To our minds, this is just sort of a shell game, shifting responsibility, and our goal is to address the source of the problem. And we think that will actually fix all these other problems that have happened, such as with DFS. So we are supporting HB 29 from the Corporations Committee. This is kind of a big rat's nest of a situation. And our goal is to start at the bottom of the base. If we create a permanent funding source, we can build everything else around that. Our main concern is to stop the bleeding. For years, I mean, even since we had mineral money, funeral directors have just been paying the extra expense of indigent burials. And again, yeah, like you've just been discussing, that's only for people who qualify for SSI, Medicaid, or Power. And as Representative Schwartz just said, they used to pay $1,000 a long time ago. Now it's $500, and obviously the actual expense is much higher. So what we would like to see, yes, is to see this legislation go and everybody working together towards the root of the problem, stop the bleeding, and after that we can work on building a fancy prosthesis.
So, Mr. Urbakite, the question is, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. The question is, whose responsibility are certain situations? If they come under the Department of Family Services where they reimburse families, which is this program, that's one category. And then there are, as I understand, it's simply indigent folks that the county pays for. Is that a fair characterization?
In some cases. Again, like you were talking about earlier, it varies widely from municipality to district to county. That's another aspect of the problem that we'll have to address further down the road. For us, our immediate concern, like I said, is stopping the bleeding. Right now, all over the state, the most a funeral practitioner can hope to be reimbursed is $500. And that's, again, only if they're receiving benefits, which isn't always the case. And I've sent some information to the committee. Average cost for an indigent burial everywhere in the state is around $2,500. So we're just telling private citizens and local businesses, best case scenario, you're going to have to pay $2,000 to help the state or the counties maintain public health.
So let me follow up on that question. When you say the average cost or the cost is $2,500, is that your wholesale cost? Is that just, if you're just paying for costs, are you paying for the plot? Are you paying for a service? Are you paying for a typical casket, or is there a pauper's casket, something where the folks don't? Just, can you explain how you come up with that number? And is it out-of-pocket cost? Is there a profit worked into it for your operations? Explain that.
As it stands right now, that's almost entirely out of pocket. Again, the most they can hope for is 500. So the 2,500, and again, this is another part of the problem that ties into continuity around the state and everybody charging the same. So, some places require vaults, some don't. That's just one instance of how things can vary. They have to pay for plot, vault, casket, and services. We were talking, like you said before, 900 in Lander, maybe only 200 in Riverton. But if they're not from that district in Fremont, they just automatically adds $400. So all of that expense is straight out of the pocket of the funeral director. Even, their service that they provide is so comprehensive. They're even the ones that apply for the reimbursement for the families. The families don't even do that. That's just another thing funeral practitioners have been doing. And not taking credit for and paying the expense of all this time. And so again, yeah, our main thing, we're going to need a lot of legislation to help our funeral practitioners in the years moving ahead. Our main and immediate concern is stopping the bleeding. It seems pretty crazy to us that, you know, the county or the state would expect private citizens and local businesses to just pay the expense of public health. That's our immediate concern.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Urbicide, I guess I would appreciate a little clarification in the direction of the profession, because what this bill does is says if there are funds available, DFS can pay these expenses back to the family for burial services. Then you have an opportunity in a bill that's before corporations to put a surcharge on a death certificate, yet you've limited the reimbursement in the same manner that this current program exists, which are just solely back to the families of these people that are in these programs. And I'm curious as why you restricted that and didn't say that the revenue generated from this surcharge could be used for indigent burials, period, and hence try to rectify some of the problem that you are identifying here.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, great question. So yeah, there's a lot of holes in this all over the place. And with HB 29, we're trying to plug the biggest one. Because as you say, right now, benefits are only being paid when in the circumstance of being, you know, receiving Medicaid, Power, SSI. So that leaves people who aren't covered under that completely in the wind. That's a total expense to the funeral directors. So our thinking is if we plug the biggest hole and we build up from there, we'll have a much more solid infrastructure and we'll actually be able to solve this problem for everybody.
Mr. Follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
But I don't think you're plugging the biggest hole, Mr. Chairman. And my question was, is why would you only stick a half a cork in that hole instead of trying to make those funds available for all indigent burial, which to me looks to be the big hole?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Representative Larson, yeah, you're correct. And like I said, yeah, this is something that's going to have to be legislated for several years into the future. But literally right now, you know, someone not on benefits dies in a community, we're just telling funeral practitioners, you have to pay whatever it costs to make sure the rest of us stay healthy and take care of this situation. If we can even fit in half a cork in the big hole, you know, then at least we have half a cork in our main leaks. And of course, like we can amend that bill moving forward. You know, we're very flexible. We do just want to solve this for everybody. Yeah, actually, that's it. Thank you. Sorry.
So, Mr. Urbicide, can you provide us with the figures of the number of indigent burials per county or per city or per funeral home that do not fall within the Medicaid, TANF, Powers, SSI? In other words, how many that your association is covering on an annual basis, number one, and number two, how much of those that, if you get any reimbursement from the counties at all, or what reimbursement you do get and where it comes from? Because that, I think, to fill your hole, we've got to have a better understanding of what the hole is.
Mr. Chairman, of course, I will get that information for you. But I mean, again, this just highlights another aspect of the problem because there is no uniformity around the state. In those cases, you're right. Some counties will pick up that expense. In some cities, they have cemeteries that they don't charge plots for. Others do. So again, we're trying not to get wrapped up in the complexity of this problem because it is very tangled. We want to make it like very clear that our first efforts are just to do anything we can to start stemming the blood flow. Regardless of how many, a year happen at $2,500 a pop, if this continues, funeral practitioners are going to have to raise their fees to the public. It's just going to spread the problem further out and create more indigent burials because people can't afford the services.
Well, I would suggest that we're not going to help you unless we know all the facts and have the data and statistics in front of us. I don't see how this bill impacts you at all. What we're trying to do is make funds available to you, but we can only make funds available what's available. And really the language the change that we're doing in this bill doesn't affect you in terms of, it's not going to provide you less dollars. And the whole purpose of House Bill 29 is to make more dollars available to you through the use of this. And so these two tie in together for that simple purpose. At least that's my understanding. But that being said, we would like to fix the problem, but we need to fully understand the problem. And if there are variances between counties and cities and practitioners, we need to know what those are. If it's a free service for a free plot that some folks provide and some don't, then essentially what you're saying is let's pay everybody for everything that they do, and we'll just make the state or the county pay more. And our problem is we have less dollars now than we had last year. So the solution may not be that we're going to pay you more for services, but we do want to be as fair as possible and as reasonable as possible. So I don't know how we can do that without having a full understanding of all the facts, even though it's different all around the state. We need to know what they are. So, I mean, go ahead.
All right, Mr. Chairman, of course. And we will do everything we can to get you all the data that you want. Like our problem is with this bill, we're already falling so far short of properly reimbursing our funeral service practitioners. And this bill has new legislation saying just relieving the state and counties of the responsibility of an issue that is directly related to public health. That's our main concern. What this bill does and what we're saying is we understand this is a problem and it relates to public health, and it's just solely the responsibility of private citizens and local business to pick up the tab.
Well, that's not a fair statement. Number one, this bill doesn't have anything to do with what the county's responsibilities are. So you're already overstating what this bill says. And so I think it's important to address the language in this bill and the impacts in this bill by itself. I mean, I understand what your issue is, but I think that you're mischaracterizing what this bill does in terms of the county obligation. It has nothing to do with it, right? Am I wrong about that?
Mr. Chairman, I agree with you on that. Yeah, this bill, is on a state level that it relieves responsibility. And again, that's another issue we're going to have to, talk about going down the road. Whose responsibility is it? Our main point is that it should not be the responsibility of private citizens and local business.
Yeah, fair enough. I think we understand that. Representative Larson? Okay. Any other further questions for Kyle? Seeing that, is there any other public comment? Karen?
No, sir, there isn't any other public comment.
All right. Well, Kyle, we'll close public comment. We want to help you with this. And if obviously House Bill 29 is a good thing, but it's not going to solve the problem either. And so we'll have to figure out if we can help you, we'll be happy to do it. Or one of our members want to do it. And we'll have discussions with corporations after you work with them to see if there's a mechanism to do it. If it's accurate that this is going to raise $180,000 a biennium, that's going to help that's going to raise all boats. And we may have to just broaden the where those dollars can go and figure that out. And that might end up in Director Schmidt's bailiwick at some point in time. But for now, I think that, I mean, the purpose of this bill really is not to take any money away from you. It's simply to say that we're only required to expend funds that the agency has to expend. And it ties specifically into House Bill 29. And so in tandem, this will give you more money and allow you to for these particular qualified individuals, reimburse the families more. And so it's really not aimed at you at all. And at least that's my understanding of it. So any other comments from the committee? Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, and this is for Director Schmidt, question I should have asked earlier, if she knows, how much money are you spending annually on this program?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith, in 2020, we expended, and this was, of course, 2020, state fiscal year 2020 was about $87,000 on 172 recipients. In 2019, that amount was substantially higher at about 106,000 for 218 recipients. So that's the program in the last couple of years. And if I may, and this may be opening a can of worms, this is a result of the step 2 reduction we've already made. The money that we reduced from this program is already out of our budget. Without this legislation, we will be forced to find the money elsewhere.
Representative Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One last comment for Mr. Herbakite. As I understand the dilemma, it's very, very complicated on your end, but a future bill really could clean this problem really up. I think the chairman's advice to you to gather your data is really important. The people of Wyoming need to know how members of your association is hurting and how the financial impact it's having on you. But a simple bill really could clean this up. For example, a bill could simply state something like, when an indigent burial is necessary, the home-based cemetery, whoever owns it, is required to donate the lot for that purpose. So some little language on that at different levels could really clarify this and fix your problem. But I think you need to bring us some good information so that we can formulate a bill like that.
Representative Swartz.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You were breaking up. I think the other piece of information we need comes from the County Commissioner Association to poll the counties and see what they've been putting in for indigent burials. And by the way, it's $180,000 a year was the fiscal impact note on House Bill 29. So if we're talking roughly 100,000 in DFS, that leaves 80,000 for the counties. I think we just need to know whether or not that sum actually will provide the funding that's called out in statute.
Well, it'd be interesting to learn more about it. If this is a family reimbursement, it could be if the DFS is giving them $500, that means the county could be coming up with the other $1,000 for these ones. But we don't know there. So it doesn't really say that they're limited in that regard. But I don't know the answer to that. So go ahead, Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And from my conversation with our local funeral homes, it appears to me that process really takes place by the funeral homes on behalf of the family in many instances, that perhaps the wherewithal or the understanding of how to apply for that coverage or reimbursement to DFS is oftentimes provided by the funeral home, and then that reimbursement goes directly back to the funeral home by DFS in behalf of the family. Is that fair, Director Schmidt?
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, that just means that the funeral homes left chasing the dollars from the county to the state to wherever they can get it and to the family. So,
Correct.
okay, Representative Kinner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do think that HB 29 really is the right vehicle for them to take a closer look and maybe a deeper dive and maybe help us with some of these things that we've talked about this morning. So that would certainly be my hope.
Yeah, and maybe another bill or two. That's but not this one. Okay, so public discussion we've closed. We've got a motion on the bill. Could we take a roll call vote? Do we need one?
Mr. Chairman, do we need to go through the bill, or does everybody understand it?
I don't think we need to go through the bill. Does anyone like to go through the bill? It's pretty simple. If you have questions about it, we can go through it though. Representative Schwartz, you look like you're debating it.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, my only question is, I'm on the wrong, I gotta get back to the other bill. All it's, do we want to have a reference to this new account? The new account states that it's subject to legislative appropriation, and then the treasurer's office disperses it basically on a pro rata basis every 2 years. And I would be more comfortable if there was a reference to that account in here in some capacity, just to coordinate the two bills, but I don't know if it's necessary.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
my problem with that is that account doesn't exist. And so we're making reference to something that doesn't exist. And I think that we can conform those bills perhaps when we get to the floor. We could come back and do that later.
And actually what we ought to do is have House Bill 29 be introduced and move this at the latter part of the session, basically. So that we can formulate it, because one, it's the cart before the horse issue. And so we just need to be cognizant of that as we move this thing forward.
Question.
Okay, question on the bill. Could we have a roll call, Karen?
Absolutely. For House Bill 47, Representative Kinner,
Aye.
Representative Larson,
Aye.
Representative Schwartz,
Aye.
Representative Simpson,
Aye.
Representative Stith,
Aye.
Representative Walters,
Aye.
Chairman Nicholas.
Aye.
7 ayes.
And so just for my edification and probably for Kyle's as well, Director, until this becomes law, your obligation is to come up with $500 out of your budget, wherever you can get it, until House Bill 29 starts backfeeding your costs. Is that fair? Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, yes, we are living right now off the one-time appropriation, and we have available about $93,000 in that account.
And so essentially you have that available for between now and the end of the biennium.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it very much, everybody. Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee.
You bet. Okay, Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, if as you get close, I'm willing to handle that if you want me to on the floor.
Yeah, I think I will let you handle that on the floor.
Sure, Lloyd, you picked the one-line bill. Way to go.
Quick draw.
Okay, let's go to House Bill number 48. Discussion on the bill.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So and again, this kind of comes back to, and as part of the step 2 cuts for Department of Family Services and for the block grant program, which I believe is being used in 14 of the 21 counties. And it provides funding back to the, the community, the Juvenile Services Block Grant Board, which in various counties then tries to determine some programs for diversion and those sorts of things. And this bill, if I understand it correctly, is similar to the last bill. They say that funding is required of the department as long as there are funds available. And that's the change we make.
So, Director, could you just give it a little more beef on what this services are, what's providing, how much you pay, how it's been, just give us, so we have some background information and when this hits the floor.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yes, this is the Community Juvenile Service Board, and these exist in statute. What this legislation proposes is that if there's no money appropriated to us, we're not required to grant money out to the communities, but it doesn't eliminate the programs from existing. So as Representative Larson mentioned, this exists in 14 counties. There's a variety of ways that these dollars are spent. It's based on application to the department, but the main purpose is for some sort of diversion for juvenile delinquents. So depending on the county, they may spend that on a juvenile probation officer at the local level. They may pay for programming, some sort of like Big Brothers Big Sisters type programming to refer children to or youth to, rather than charging them in court. So it really is a way of just preventing children from coming or youth from coming further into the DFS system. They are typically managed by a joint powers board at the local level. And that joint powers board, I think, has mandatory participation by statutory required members.
So, Director, when you say if there's no money's appropriated to you, what is appropriated to you, and what impact does this language have on what funds you'll have available?
Mr. Chairman, in step 2, we did reduce all monies to this program. So if this, what this legislation does is says that we don't have to fund it if we don't have an appropriation for it, and we've eliminated the appropriation. So it's similar to the previous bill in that if this legislation doesn't go through, we will have to find dollars elsewhere to fund the program, which means that we'll have to reduce somewhere else within the budget.
So my question, Director, is how much have you been funding? So what is the impact of, how much did you cut through step 2?
Mr. Chairman, the total amount that we've reduced in the current budget is about $580,000. We only cut 1 year of the biennium to give the Community Juvenile Services Board 1 year to be able to find alternate resources or revenue. The full appropriation will be cut in the 23-24 biennium, and that will be 1.16, so 1,160,000.
And are there other sources for that money, or is it just, in other words, are there federal dollars? Are there grant dollars? Where are the counties going to go that these services boards, if they can't go to you?
Mr. Chairman, yes, there may be federal dollars available. I know there's some grant awards through the federal government that they could apply for. We polled the community juvenile service boards in December and found that a lot of them are reaching out for local revenue sources, whether that's city, county government, or other means.
Questions for Director? Representative Stith.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. For Director Schmidt, is there a sense for the consequences of defunding the program? And it's my understanding that the program is designed, say, in this county here, you have a juvenile who's, first-time offender for marijuana possession, and the board says, well, instead of prosecuting this person, let's put him into a diversion program. So if the money for diversion goes away, then you prosecute them. And there's a cost to doing that, both directly to the state for paying for the prosecution and for the defense probably. And then there's also the down the road consequences of taking this kid and now kind of putting them into the system, so to speak. Is this a good, does it make sense to cut this program?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stiff. So this goes back to the bigger conversation about reducing our general fund budget. And so when looking at the totality of our programs, we decided on this particular program for a couple reasons. One, the governor had recommended that we look at program elimination rather than death by 1,000 cuts. So instead of just continually decreasing. The second part of this particular program is that it does not pay for the full share of the program. Counties or communities are also required to match. So it's not 100% funding for those programs. And then third, again, it provides services for 14 counties. It's not a statewide program, so to speak. But to get to your point about, is this a good idea? It does reduce prevention services in the communities. I mean, I can't deny that. The implications of it, we don't know. We know that juvenile justice and juvenile delinquency crime has continued to decrease over years. So we know that that population isn't as significant as it was in the late 90s, early 2000s, when there were a lot of concerns about a super predator or a super juvenile delinquent where there was going to be a lot of crimes. That did not bear out. We've talked to the State Advisory Council and will continue to encourage them to look at some sort of study where they can connect with the county attorneys and to look at what the impact will be. Again, the impact won't start until July 1st for those who choose not to continue with the program. But I do think it merits some study. It's not a DFS responsibility in and of itself because it involves programs that we have nothing to do with, that we're not affiliated with. It really is a local program. So that's why we're encouraging maybe the State Advisory Council take a look at what the impact would be over time.
So Corin, what are the 14 counties? I kind of like to know what the 14 counties are and what those other counties do that don't use your dollars. And if they have other sources of dollars or they've just taken upon themselves to pay more. So that would just be interesting information for us to have. And I mean, we're coming back to the same issue over and over again. We have less dollars to spread. And so somebody's going to feel the impact at some place. And at some point, we have to weigh the balances of what is the greatest bang for our buck on where we're distributing it and what the impacts are to the community. And it's this is just one of many challenges we're facing. Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and kind of following up on that, and it's a question for Director Schmidt, but my understanding, talking to both, my local provider and my understanding of the WISA people is that acknowledging that there will be cuts, I think they believe that they would rather see the cuts here than direct appropriations to providing group home services and things like that. Is that a correct approximation of what their position is?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, yes. When we started to go through the budget reduction process, we reached out to the Wyoming Youth Services Association, who are one of our biggest provider groups. They provide residential treatment, residential treatment, group homes, and crisis stabilization or crisis shelter for kids prior to coming into DFS. And so looking at our system of care, if we were to reduce our crisis stabilization services, that really does remove a placement opportunity for those families that absolutely need some immediate relief. So yes, I do think that looking at the DFS system of care, crisis services provide us with a better chance of preventing children from coming further into care, whereas the community juvenile service boards may prevent some sort of citation or some sort of probation. So again, Mr. Chairman, to back what you were saying, it is one of those areas where we made a reduction based on where we felt families most needed the services. And community juvenile service boards is largely a local function.
Follow up, Mr. Chair.
Please.
So in response to what Representative Stith was discussing about diversion, removing this funding doesn't eliminate the potential for diversion. That can be done through other channels, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, yes. The community juvenile service boards will still exist. Those won't go away. It's just the money from the state that's being reduced.
Okay. Any further discussion or questions for the director? Any public comment? I see we got Daniel Shannon, looks like. Karen?
Chairman Nicholas, I don't believe he is in here to provide public testimony at this time.
Okay. Is there any other public comment?
No, sir, we don't have any other public comment.
All right, any further questions?
Move the bill.
Second.
Bill's been moved by Representative Larson, seconded by Representative Walters. Further discussion? If not, roll call, please.
All right, on House Bill 48, Representative Kinner,
Aye.
Representative Larson,
Aye.
Representative Schwartz,
Aye.
Representative Simpson. I'm sorry, Representative Simpson? Thank you. Representative Stith,
Aye.
Representative Walters,
Aye.
Chairman Nicholas.
Aye. All right,
7 ayes.
who would like to carry this bill on the floor? All right, Representative Schwartz, it's yours.
Chairman Nicholas,
Yes?
before we go to that next bill, I just a comment. We know that as we serve on this committee, the importance of having a stern and stoic facial expression is key. And I just really like to compliment our new members, Representative Stith and Representative Simpson. It's obvious that they've been practicing. I sensed one attempt from Director Schmidt on levity, and they resisted the smile. My compliments to you guys. Job well done.
Thank you very much.
All right, next bill is House Bill 49, agency fee revisions. So who's going to walk us through this bill?
Mr. Chairman, just so that you are aware, I have invited in the directors of
Yeah, I see Luke and
corrections as
Todd.
well as DEQ.
Yeah, I see that.
And Mr. Chairman, I can, I am the one that made the recommendations on the DEQ budget or fee increases on and in the Department of Health, and so I'm happy to respond to my rationale on those. And yes, largely as I went down through each of those agencies, I looked at how long it had been since those fees that had been changed. I think Director Parfit provided us a handout and indicates that in most cases it had been some time in the case of mining permits, even back till 1973. And for the committee's edification, when you go over to the Department of Health side on licensure for like hospitals and ambulatory surgical centers, most of them had not been changed since 1994. I reached out to some of those facilities to get a reasonable, to try and get a reasonable increase in amount that they felt that they could live with, and that was the basis for those numbers.
So because we've got Director Parfit on screen, why don't you take us to the specific provisions in the bill that address those, and let's just walk through the numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Todd Parfit, Director of the Department of Environmental Quality. If you go to page 10, line 15, that's where the references to the Department of Environmental Quality begin. And just looking at the bill, there's on page 11, line 7, just a minor change there that indicates that for air quality, the fee is subject to minimum amounts specified in paragraph J, which begins on page 12. I'll just say real quickly, there are basically 4 components to the proposed bill change. The first is to the application fee from $464 currently to $500. Now, the $500 is a minimum fee. The $464, it doesn't. None of these changes show up in statute previously, but that's the application fee. Romanet 2 on line 6 is the hourly rate that is charged to process or to review and act on permits. And so we're going from $58 an hour currently to $75 an hour. And I'll come back to that, but the third one change here is on line 10, which is on the relocation of equipment. This is typically associated with crushers and screeners with some of the mining activity, and it just changes the self-issuance permits when you make notification from $100 per notification to $150 per notification. And then the fourth one on line 14 pertains to if you don't have the self-issuance permit, meaning that you can, without coming back to the agency for another permit, you can move a piece of equipment from one facility to another. Changes those to $300. And I just would note that in recent times, we haven't had any of these, but that doesn't mean that we won't sometime down the road.
So that goes from what to what?
It goes to, there is no fee currently to $300. So
could you tell us when the last time these were increased?
Yes, we sent over to LSO a table, and specifically, this is for air quality, and these fees for the applications was modified in 2009. The fee, I don't see on, yeah, the fee was 2009 as well, the $58. But the key on this is that it applied only to the minor or the NSR new source review permits. The large major permits, which are called Title V, we only applied an emission fee. That emission fee is $34.50 per ton. And that was last revised in 2012. What this draft bill would do would incorporate an application fee to the Title V program that we currently don't assess. And it would also add the $75 an hour for the review and acting on the permits. And that would be in addition to the emission fee. And currently the emission fee covers our costs. Now, one thing I'll say is we are in the process of reviewing the emission fee, because as the emissions decrease and the collections per ton decrease, then we end up having to adjust the fee upward. Now, if we get more facilities into the Title V program and more emissions, then the fee is reduced. So we're in the process of reviewing that right now. We would have to take this into consideration so that we don't inadvertently over collect on the fees or under collect, as the case may be. So don't see any issues with this, but just wanted to point that out. And we did do a fiscal note on this, just for your information as well.
Yeah, I think we have it at the back of the bill. Further questions for Representative Walters?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Parfit, based on your previous comments, as you discussed this, 3 and 4, you haven't been doing because there hasn't been any of those changes, if I understood that correctly. 4, there was no cost, now it would be $300. And number 1, the application, the existing way of assessing the charges, you're covering all of your expenses, and this would be a new way of doing this. So the overall of my question is, this section even needed since you are covering your expenses, just doing it through a different format of charging fees in a different way?
So, Mr. Chairman, the first part of this, just to be clear, Romanet 3 on line 10, we do have facilities that fall into this category, and I think we identify the number of facilities annually in the fiscal note. It's the 4th category that we don't really see a lot of.
Okay, my misunderstanding.
That's okay. It's good to get the clarification. Now, as far as, and this is the distinction between the minor sources, what this bill would do is set a minimum amount that would be charged. I'm not overly concerned about that. Where there's the difference is in the Title V, in the way we collect fees to operate the program, which is required under the Clean Air Act. We can either do it with emission fees only, or we can do it with the combination, as this is suggesting, of collecting an hourly rate for the review and acting on the permit, which might actually provide a more stable source of funding than relying on the emissions solely. So I don't see an objection there, but we will have to take a close look at what the emission fee is, because if we left it where it is and also added the hourly rate charge, we would over collect what we need to actually operate the program.
Perfect.
Further
Thank you for the
questions?
explanation.
Further questions for Todd? Seeing none, then going back to the bill, let's just page through the bill. The ones that I have biggest questions about, and I see that Director Shannon is online with us. And so could you bring him in, Karen?
Mr. Chairman, I'm online, sir.
Hi, how are you, Director?
I'm well, sir. Yourself?
Just great. So my question, and I Representative Fifth and I have talked a little bit about this informally, is essentially we're transferring fees for probation and parole folks to, so that when they do get out on probation and parole, that they have to pay for some of the services that you're providing to them. Is that a fair characterization of it?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
And what we want to make sure is that that we're not over, basically taking every penny in their pocket to once they get out, so they can't provide for the basic services. They can't, they can afford wherever they're staying, they can afford food and the basic necessities of life. So if you could just tell us a little bit about that and that issue, I think it would be useful.
Certainly. Mr. Chairman, committee members, I'm Dan Shannon, Director of Department of Corrections. I won't take much of your time. I'll just give a little briefing on how we got where we're at today. During our budget reductions in step 2 and 3, field services, we were required, and we cut in excess of $6.1 million. With that cut, there was 19 positions removed from probation and parole. 4 individuals lost their employment, 15 through attrition. As vacancies came up, we took those positions and have them removed. A part of that, we had 6 additional parole office positions, and we looked at every avenue of revenue on how we can support through a general fund these positions without cutting more. And going into the chairman's question, what we did was Wyoming is a part of 26 states that have probation and parole part of their Department of Corrections. We were the only state, we determined that we were the only state within this unit that does not collect fees for supervision. From there, committee members, we looked at what was going on around our surrounding states. Montana is charging a $50 fee a month, South Dakota 40, Nebraska 35, Utah 30, Colorado 50. We still weren't comfortable with proposing this and moving forward. This is the last thing we do. We're not going to run a popular institution where we're going to punish the poor and make them worse chance of not being successful. So as we went through the fees, it was anticipated that those 6 positions would be $746,000. There's also a processing fee, even though we can take the payment and we'll do it ourselves. There is a processing fee if we utilize external online payments. With that, we asked the question of those 26 states, what percentage pays? And normally it was right around between 50 and 52% recoup the funds. So we went to a conservative figure of 40. And what I can reassure the board that this number of, as we did our fiscal note of 1,042,000 is only an estimate, because we have a matrix of sanctions. And the example would be, if an individual has a good survivable wage and just not paying, sanctions would be imposed. We're not going to extend probation or parole. And if they don't pay, there won't be additional sanctions. We're trying to teach 2 things. 1, we're trying to recover some money to pay for the services. Number 2, we're trying to teach individuals a responsibility, no different than we pay for our vehicle insurance, medical care, things of that nature. But I want to reassure you that we would only go above our classification of our level 1 matrix on sanctions. So it's better to, what type of things? It would be increased meetings with their parole agent, maybe meeting with their parole agent and their treatment provider to ensure they're doing what they're supposed to. It is not to incarcerate or to increase our institutional population, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for Director Shannon from the committee?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Director Shannon, because that was my question, was about what the sanctions would entail. And I'm made much more comfortable by your description, but the way you're stating it, it sounds like the sanctions then increase costs to the department because they will be required to have more meetings with either their substance abuse counselors or their probation officer. Is that a fair assumption?
It wouldn't increase the cost, Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz. It wouldn't increase the cost to the state or to the offender. Those are flat fees. So the example is if you're paying a $25 supervision fee, depending on if you're on intensive supervision, you may be required already to meet with your agent 4 times a month. If you're doing the DUI, maybe a mail-in or once. So the increase oversight would not be a cost to the offender or the state.
So, Dan, I do have a question. On page 2, line 14, you say would cause the person a significant financial hardship. So how, will you define a significant financial hardship by case, by rule or regulation? I mean, to me, that's when you go to court or if there's a probation violation because they didn't pay their fees. That's an issue that's going to be a question that people are going to be arguing about. So I'm just curious how you envision that being enforced or defined.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, it is subjective to say a financial hardship. It is not the Department of Corrections' intent to take individuals back to court or revocate because they're not paying. We can say, well, obviously no one would pay these fees. Why would they if there's no, but there will be, and I will forward to the committee what our sanctions are, and it will not exceed beyond level 1. There's 3 levels of sanctions. So in level 1, returning to court for non-payment will not be a part of it. It's about teaching and having the agent work with the offender of teaching responsibility of, and nationally, as I said, on an average, folks are paying about 51%. Now, to answer your question regarding fiscal financial hardship, we have individuals that work within our, maybe work within our oil fields that are making considerable money, and other individuals, it's all they can do just to get by. And we have oversights. We have where the district manager as well as the administrator would have to approve these sanctions. It's not going to, that way it's done statewide. So yes, it is subjective, but it will not increase incarceration.
And so, for example, some folks get out, and typically if you get out, there's a requirement that you're either seeking employment or you're working, one or the other. So I presume that if you're regularly seeking employment, but you haven't found employment, or your employment is only part-time, and typically you got to pay for some of your housing as well, so that you have that obligation on top of this. Is there some type of a cap where you say that we won't take more than 50% or 60% of your income? Yeah, and some of these folks, when they get out, they may have requirements for child support. They may have other obligations when they get out. So do you take all of those considerations and then find out what someone can reasonably support and cover their obligations to survive when they're back on the, in the public arena, when you make these assessments and whether or not on what's a significant financial hardship is?
Mr. Chairman, committee members, the cost and the sanctions set forth by the court and the release of the parole applications will clearly define what an offender's or parolee's cost would be as far as housing, court costs, restitution, things of that nature. These supervision fees would only come after that, and would be very clear about that. The example would be if an individual, as the chairman spoke of, the individual is out, he or she's actively pursuing employment, working part-time, doesn't have the funds, but it doesn't mean we can't then increase our community service. We can't get that done. Doesn't mean we can't have them work towards their educational goals, things of that nature. I'm looking, we could ask the question, why haven't we done this in the past? This is not the catch-all. This answer is to improve interaction with the offender, the agent, to teach responsibility, and at last cost if we can recoup some funding. So, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to reassure the committee that the intent is not to punish, it is not to reincarcerate, but it's to teach responsibility while having possibly the ability to recoup some funding to support the state's general fund.
Okay, any other further questions for the director? Seeing none, Director Schmidt, let's go to the issuance of license fees or whatever else that affects you with this rule. Tell us about them.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Yes, this is asking permission to remove the statutory required $10 fee for central registry checks for adult protective services and for children. At this point, we do not have any intention of raising the fee, but being held to the $10 fee later on may give us some complications, and we would just like the flexibility to establish the fee amount in rule rather than statute.
And can you take us to the page and line just so we're all on the same page?
Sure, Mr. Chairman. If you look at page 3 and 4, and the specific language change is on page 4, line 16. And it just, again, changes it from a $10 statutory fee to an amount determined per rule. And then there is mirror language in the adult protection statutes as well. And I think that's on page, starts on page 15. The actual language change is on page 17, lines 7 and 8.
Okay, questions with regarding those fees? Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So Director Schmidt, so it's now instead of a $10 fee, it's an amount to be determined. Do you have any sense what that to be determined will be?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, at this time, we don't have any intention of raising the fee. However, as part of our cost reductions, our state general fund reductions, we did transfer more of the financial responsibility to pay for central registry onto the fund that collects the fees. So at some point, we may have to increase the fees in order to cover the costs for managing the central registry.
So Director, how much did you transfer? In other words, what did that stage 2 cut? How much did it reduce?
Mr. Chairman, I believe it was $112,000.
And so to recoup that $112,000, if you do it through this fee or for the fees on page 15 and 16, do you have an estimate of what you would have to increase? How much it would be?
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe that we determined that because we don't know what the increased costs would be. At this point, we have a little bit of a surplus that we expect at current spending will last us 10 years. So we wouldn't anticipate having to do an increase for at least 10 years.
That'd be nice. Further questions for the director? All right, seeing none, thank you again for being here. So committee, paging through the bill. Do we have anyone to make comments on the healthcare facilities increases? Page 5, 6, and 7. And 8. As I recall, go ahead, Representative Larson, do you have an input on that?
Mr. Chairman, I'll just tell you that on page 6, Roman and I, adult daycare was last changed in 1998. The rest of them were not were last changed in 1994.
And these changes basically, we just went back in and looked at the fees and said, when was the last time they raised, how much they are, and what's reasonable, right?
I did, and I reached out, like I said, to the hospital and some nursing homes and said, is this reasonable? And you'll see, like on some of them, I break that down based on the number of beds they had. That was the suggestion that come back. It kind of says, if you do it based on the number of beds from 25 up to over 100 and stuff and adjust it to that, that was reasonable. And on hospitals, you see that I raised that to 1,000 when I reached out to a couple of former CEOs, hospital CEOs. They say in other states that their annual licensure for the state is far exceeds that, and you know they kind of smiled at what we had been charging historically.
Okay, is there any other components of this that we haven't talked about or that So what we're going to want to do is, when this bill comes up, we'll probably break it off. So one individual can take one section and one takes the other. So, and
Miss-
Representative Larson, I'll let you divvy that out as we present it on the floor.
Okay.
Representative Walters?
Mr. Chairman, on page 9 and 10, there is the Department of Ag food licensing fees. And those were Representative Summers' increases. They hadn't occurred in a while. And then you'll notice he increases them modestly, but then also 50% of that will go back to the general fund versus to the agency.
So Representative Walters, will you take that? I'll help Lloyd divvy them out.
Perfect.
Anything else? Do we want to walk through the bill? Are we comfortable with who's got what? Lloyd?
I am. Mr. Chairman, maybe we just have that discussion where I'd done the work on DQ and Department of Health. I'm happy to take those. Do we know who brought forth the Department of Corrections?
I think it was probably volunteered.
And so then maybe we could ask Representative Stiff to work to do that where that's his agency.
Yep.
And I'll do the DEQ one or the DFS ones. I guess I would just divide them up kind of on the agencies that we have.
Okay, please do that, and then we'll proceed from there.
Thank you.
Is there any, Karen, is there any other public comment?
Yes, sir. We have Laura Hudspeth to provide public comment. We also have a representative of Department of Agriculture.
Okay, just bring them in. Ms. Hudspeth, welcome.
Hi, sweetie.
Waiting for her to pop up.
And Mr. Chairman, she's with the Department of Health.
Mr. Chairman, Laura Hudspeth with the Department of Health. No comment, just ready to stand for any questions. I believe Representative Larson did answer many of those.
Okay, great, Laura, appreciate that. Julie, do you have any comments?
Mr. Chairman, Julie Cook, the CFO of the Wyoming Department of Agriculture. I'm just here to answer any questions if you have any.
Julie, have you got any feedback or comments from your constituents regarding these increases? Are they reasonable?
Mr. Chairman, we haven't received any comments from anyone on this issue. We have had comments in the past during the pandemic about why are we charging these fees for local restaurants, but we feel the fees are reasonable. You will note in the legislation, though, however, the increase would go directly to the general fund and not to our budget, so really has no impact on our budgeting.
So Judy, do you have the ability, for example, if a restaurant is closed because of the pandemic, to waive a fee or to reduce it or proportionalize it while it's not operating?
Mr. Chairman, no, it's a yearly fee. So as long as they're in operation at any time during then, we would charge that fee. We don't have any ability, to my knowledge, that we would be able to, refund a fee or anything like that at this point in time.
My guess is that portion of that fee may be reimbursable or under our CARES Act dollars if they so chose to do it, but I don't know the answer to that. So that's the $250 fees. That's what is the fee for the restaurants?
Mr. Chairman, the fee for a new restaurant is currently $100 for a new license. An annual renewal fee is $50, and the current fee for a temporary food license is $25.
Okay. Further questions for Department of Ag?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Ms. Cook, when was the last time these fees were increased?
Mr. Chairman, this fee was put into place in 2000.
And has been static at that level since 2000?
Correct, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Schwartz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Julie, I'm just curious, how many inspections do you perform in an average restaurant in the course of a year?
Mr. Chairman, all of the inspections are based on risk. However, everyone is seen at least once a year. So if you have a higher risk, then you could be seen, more than once a year. But if you're at normal risk, then it would be about once a year.
Follow, Mr. Chair.
So is Representative Schwartz, if you were running the restaurant, would probably be a higher risk?
Mr. Chairman, having run some restaurants, I would argue that point. But, but Julie, do you have an estimate what an inspection costs the agency?
Mr. Chairman, I do not have that information right now, no.
Okay, it's not critical.
Well, the question, I guess the next question, Julie, would be, do the fees pay for the service?
Mr. Chairman, no, they would not. We had prepared for the Joint Appropriations Committee a memo asking us that question from our hearing that we had with our budget. And we had said that if our division was to operate without any general fund, an annual license would need to be approximately $863 annually.
For a restaurant, all right.
Correct.
Or maybe just a gift certificate, so you can eat there while you're inspecting. Okay, further questions? Seeing none. Any other public comment, Karen?
No, sir, there's no other public comment.
Representative Walters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back to Mrs. Cook. Regarding the department and their working with local health agencies to do the inspections. So if this fee doubles and a county does the inspections on behalf of the Department of Agriculture, how will this fee affect or negatively or positive, or any other thoughts on that?
Mr. Chairman, my understanding of how this bill was written is that the increased fee, so for example, if we're just talking about a renewal, is currently $50. The renewal would increase to $100. $50 of that renewal would go to the general fund, and the remaining $50, which we've already been collecting here on, would be distributed as it is today. So there would be, as I said, no impact to the Wyoming Department of Agriculture's budget or to the counties that are doing those at all. The only change in that would be going to the general fund.
Very good, thank you.
Okay, any further questions? Okay, we'll close public discussion. Any further discussion on the bill? Seeing none.
Move the bill.
Been moved by Representative Walters, seconded by Representative Kenner. Further discussion? Roll call on the bill, please. Representative Schwartz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We dealt with these fee increases back in December, and I actually voted against the Department of Corrections piece back then. I'm still a little reluctant. Director Shannon's explanation is giving me some comfort. And the thing is, if you look at the fiscal note, it's really the only fee that generates a significant amount of revenue. It's about $1 million a year. I think the highest other ones are $140,000 a year. So I will reluctantly vote for the bill. When it comes to the floor, I might ask for a division.
Fair enough. Further discussion? Karen, roll call.
Thank you, sir. On House Bill 49, Representative Kenner.
Aye.
Representative Larson.
Aye.
Representative Schwartz.
Yeah.
Representative Simpson.
Aye.
Representative Stith.
Aye.
Representative Walters.
Aye.
Chairman Nicholas.
Aye.
7 ayes.
Okay, thank you. And so Representative Larson, you and others will spearhead this on the floor. Okay, committee, I think for in terms of is there any other business that any members wants to discuss while we're on the public record? Seeing none, Karen and committee and the public, we're going to close this meeting of the House Appropriations. After this, we're going to go into a working group session. And so we'll take about a 10-minute break. And then we've got a new Zoom meeting that will come on and we'll begin our work session. Karen, would you alert Don Richards that we're probably going to want him to have some discussion with us, so if he's available?
Absolutely, I'll let staff know.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, like 10:30, is that what you're thinking? It's 10:17 now, so.
10:30 be great.